So think of something like that. We are moving the compute that used to happen in the hospital as much as possible to the patient home.
Do you think that traditional hospital will even exist in 20 years?
No matter you're the richest kid in San Francisco or the poorest kid in India, as long as you have a mobile phone with some basic internet connectivity, your Google map takes you from A to B exactly the same way.
What do you think most healthcare startups get wrong about working with NHS or healthcare systems in general?
When you're healthy, you're like kind of standing straight. As soon as chronic conditions or disease happens, you're like tilting a little bit. And
Yeah.
if no one's intervened, if you don't get the best care, you deteriorate, and boom, you
Yeah.
die. What we do, very simple. When you're like a little bit sick, we come here with the data collections being proactive and predictive. We try either to push you back to your most
Optimize best
optimized,
health.
stable, or at least slow down the progression of the disease.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Nadia's Lab. As you probably already know, I am a pharmacist working in research, and I host this podcast to talk about my passions and things that I'm really interested about, such as healthcare, medicine, and well-being. Today, I'm joined by Den Vadat. Den, welcome. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.
Den is a CEO and founder of Huma, a health tech company which is transforming how care is delivered to patients and also how clinical research is being run, and it uses essentially helps using the digital platforms in running clinical research. Now, then, thank you for joining me today. I appreciate that you're very busy and you have been obviously working a lot. And I also noticed that you've been recognized as a top 50 in digital health honoree as per Rock Health. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
How does that feel?
You know, it's great. I love what Rock Health does as a company, but I don't care much about awards. But it's nice, and I'm like very grateful.
You're very humble, but thank you. So I want to start by asking a couple of personal questions just to understand your background and why you started Huma. So if it's okay with you, I wanted to ask what inspired you to start Huma, and was there any defining moment to push you into health tech?
Um, it was a journey. It's not that one night I woke up. I grew up in a family of doctors. Right, my father is a cardiologist, my sister is a gynecologist, and as a kid, I really observed kind of like the life that my father had. If someone had a heart problem or heart attack, people call them, and sometimes in the middle of the night. But when you really go deep with every disease, heart health is one kind of use case. You can see that complications of a disease is very predictable. If you have the data, you can actually be very proactive. You don't need to deal with the heart attack of the persons. You can deal with it before it happens. And then my life continued at Johns Hopkins, and I worked at Hopkins Medicines a little bit, and I've worked at John Radcliffe and Oxford and so on in that community, and been exposed to doctors in the space. And I realized the problem is the same. They're the same in the US, they're the same in the UK. And when you go really deep, people know a lot about you as a patient when you're in front of them, when you're in the hospitals with them. But as soon as you leave and you go home, which is 99% of your life, they know nothing. And that's why we thought with connected devices, sensors, wearables, mobile computing, and so on, we might be able to bring a little bit of visibility into what's happening. And by having that, be more proactive and predictive.
And also, I guess it's also like preventing rather than treating as well, because being able to see what patient is maybe experiencing at home, you can, like you said, prevent heart attack by bringing them in for a checkup earlier, which is absolutely great. And what do you think was broken in healthcare that you felt that only Huma could fix? I mean, you've kind of covered that.
Yeah.
Is the aspect of patients being at home and doctors not knowing anything about what's happening at home, really.
Yeah. Look, it really started as a hobby project, something that, when you go back, I was like, I don't know, 25, 26 years old, and really thinking that what are the coolest stuff I can do based on the technology. And at the time, iPhone was super new, iPad just got out. And it wasn't like, oh, Dan wanted to change, the healthcare in the world.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, if anything, at the time, because I was in Oxford, no one thought anyone can change NHS and healthcare in the UK.
Yeah.
So it started in a very simple way, cool project. Maybe we do something, and maybe it helps, a few people here and there, kind of things. And then slowly, you do things and you learn a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. And then you're like, you know what? Maybe I can do something big.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's great. Very inspiring. So, a lot of obviously Huma's what Huma does is the digital first healthcare. So, how is Huma helping hospitals extend the care beyond the walls?
Um, the thing is, you are staying in the hospital because people either are doing a lot of things on you, given that your condition is very unstable, or people are worried
Yeah.
something will go wrong or could go wrong. Now, as a patient and as a doctor that you have, if you see, okay, the patient is more or less okay, but I can have my eyes virtually on the
Mm-hmm.
patients, you can actually discharge the patients earlier.
Yes.
So that's, I think, one opportunity. And then the other one is, look, whether you're in the hospitals or not, you're patients that at any point in time, something can go wrong, right?
Yeah.
If you have a heart attack, if you have asthma, you will have, asthma attack and so on. And by having that continuous real-time data, it enables the health systems, the doctors, the nurses, and so on, to be on top of your condition. And if they see something is trending in the wrong directions, intervene. Or even in the simpler cases, when you have a chronic disease, you see your doctor once every year, twice every year.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And what that means, in that 6 months that you're not seeing your doctor, most likely you're not on the most optimized treatment. Either you're taking too much or too little, or you're even on the wrong drug. And by having the data in a more continuous way, not only we can be proactive and predictive about the complications, but also actually we can be optimized about your health. And then that's kind of the vision of the human. How can we keep every patient the most optimized version of themselves? Yes, I'm an asthma patient. I may not be as good as a normal person, but I can be the best version of myself.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of what Huma is all about. And by building these digital tools, we are really trying to get that accessible to everybody, given that technology is very scalable.
Amazing. So you kind of mentioned it as well, but could you tell me more about hospitals at home and what does that look like in practice?
So there are different terms and names for this kind of approach: hospitals at home, virtual wards, digital first care. They all have more or less same meanings, which is, you as a patient, you should not spend time as much as possible within the four walls of the clinic, the hospitals. Now, that could be staying in the hospitals, that could be, seeing your doctors back and forth, because a lot of those conversations, if the doctor has the data
Mm-hmm.
upfront, they can be proactive. You don't even need to come to the hospitals, because then you don't have the asthma attack, you won't have the heart attack, you won't
Yeah.
feel super sick that you now need to be basically staying in the hospital. So by moving the monitoring and supervisions that used to happen in the hospitals to the patient's home, we are trying to make the care more proactive and predictive. And this is kind of the movement that, if you go back in the history, uh, with computers, there was a time everybody would go to a center to access computers, right? 60 years ago. But now everybody has a computer in their pocket. So think of something like that. We are moving the compute that used to happen in the hospital as much as possible to the patient home.
Amazing. And do you think that traditional hospital will even exist in 20 years?
Part of the responsibilities they have, yes, it will stay. Like if you need a surgery, most likely there will be a place that humans and robots together, they do surgery on you. If I guess the condition is super complicated, maybe still. But for a lot of things, it will become less and less. Uh, Again, a good example is for a lot of people, they don't need computers anymore.
Yeah.
They do everything with their mobile phone.
Absolutely.
There was a time that you could only do everything with your
on the
computer.
computer.
And then if you go back, you had to go to the kind of this mainframes somewhere else, not even personal computer. So you can see still we have in a way some mega computers like mainframes, but very rarely people use that. Then personal computers, some people use it more, some people use it a lot less. And then you have the mobile computing.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk a bit about human research and clinical trials. So I myself work in clinical trials, and I just wanted to explain a bit how that works. And basically, so usually so I work within NHS, so National Healthcare System. So there's usually research and development R&D department. And then a sponsor. So if a study is commercial, a sponsor is going to be like a big pharma company. Or if it's a non-commercial study, sponsor might be a university or another hospital. So they will approach the research and development department, which will then approach me, and I just check, whether we have the feasibility and capacity to run a certain study in our hospital. Do we think that it's clinically appropriate? Do I think essentially that we can meet the patient targets for the study? Now, you Huma supports something called decentralized clinical trials. So DCTs, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but they're essentially clinical trials which are defined as studies executed through telemedicine and mobile local healthcare providers. So could you walk us through how your platform supports these digital or hybrid clinical studies?
Um, what we do at the core of Huma is data collection, right? And we do that data collections wherever the patient is with use of mobile phones connected to different sensors. Now, we started on the care side using the data, based on those data, drive insights that helps the doctors, the nurses to be more proactive and predictive about the patient. Now, the same concept is very valid in the world of clinical trial. In this case, you don't have the patient, you have the participants that they want to go through a study, which it could be an academic one, or it could be like a new drugs that being tested. And what matters in that kind of research is data. Data is the most important thing. Now, in the past, you as a participant in a clinical trial, you had to go back to the site, meet you in your office, and then you would ask questions, you do some measurements, and so on and so forth. And that was the model in the past. With new technologies like Huma, you don't need to go to the site. You can actually provide a lot of data virtually from the comfort of your home. And still, you may need to do imaging. Instead of 20 times in a year, maybe you will go 2 times a year. Now, that is really important because number one, you will end up collecting a lot more data in between.
Yes.
In a real world environment of the patient or the participants, because then they're not stressed, they don't need to travel. You get a lot more real-time data that historically you didn't have. But more importantly, I think it opens up opportunities to people that maybe they couldn't do 20 times visit. If you're a mom, have children's, live far from a center, it might not be as convenient for you to leave your kids 20 times a year to participate in a study. But if it's 2 times,
you might more likely participate in a study.
Or if you don't live next to, let's say, Chelsea Hospital, and Chelsea Hospital is doing the study, it might be difficult for you to travel from, let's say, Surrey to come here. But if it's only 2 times, maybe it's not that difficult.
Absolutely.
So it also makes the kind of participations more accessible.
Exactly. I agree. And how do you approach challenges like protocol adherence and participant retention?
Look, protocol adherence and participant retention still valid in the traditional way, when you do it, you have a drop off and this. In fact, you can argue if the person is already on the applications, connected, they're providing the data, they get actually some insight back, the likelihood of them staying is actually higher, because in the old world, they get nothing.
Yeah.
20 times you come in, you talk to someone, and then you go home. You know nothing, you get nothing. But at least with applications and technology, you actually start seeing your own data, your own trend, the content, they're all in one place. You get notifications, you get motivations, you get nudges, whatever,
Yeah.
So in a way, these kind of technologies, in fact, increases your adherence to the protocol, and for you to stay on the study, hopefully until the end of the study.
Yeah, and that subsequently will give more reliable and accurate results as well, which is what study needs. So my next question would be, how is Huma contributing to more diverse and inclusive research? But I think we touched base on that already, and it was quite obvious. So moving on, another big aspect and part of Huma is the Huma software as a medical device, SAMD solutions. So I was going to ask, what are some real-world examples of your SMADA solutions being used? If you can share that with us. And if there are any, how do you handle any regulatory pathways for digital tools?
So the SAMD one stands for software as a medical device for an application, which means the app is not anymore a normal app. It's not a wellness app. With a wellness app, most applications, at best, you can see some content. Maybe you can, report some data, and that's about it. You can't do diagnostics based on the data. You can't do predictions. You can't do decision support, meaning tell the patients you need to change the dosage, or tell the doctors that these patients might not be on the right, treatments, and you have to put them, let's say, in a case of asthma, on biologics. When a software it's approved by regulatory bodies, FDA, EU, MDR, and so on, which our platform is, and that's kind of our claim to fame, you can launch programs for different diseases, and they all come with the approval based on the data that we collect, whether it's like a real-time feeds from wearables or medical device sensors or patient symptoms or the medications that the patient is taking, everything that's possible. I can actually tell the patients to do certain things or not. I can flag to the clinical teams that, okay, this patient is deteriorating and we need to do something about it. And that is like suddenly you're bringing a lot of delightful insights back to the doctors or to the patients. And that's what it means when we talk about SAMD. It's much harder, obviously, because now you're making decisions that can have a life and death kind of impact. But there are processes that if you go through and regulatory bodies approves it, then you're allowed to do that. And our platform is considered in that bucket.
Safe and approved. Amazing. Congratulations. So I wanted to talk about the future of digital health, and I want to kind of get your opinion on where the field is heading to. So what excites you the most about the future of digital health?
I think the biggest opportunity, the way I see it, with the kind of technology that we have built, think of it as pipes that brings all the data, and then somehow we can generate the insights. Historically, we relied a lot on human doctors, nurses, to look at all this data, to look at everything else, to look at the best protocols in the world, and then hopefully communicate something, an action, suggestions, and interventions to the patient. Now, as you know, doctors are busy, nurses are busy, more and more data are being generated, and the existing model, the way it works, it's really hard to get the attention of every doctors and every patients.
Absolutely.
But with these new AI models, suddenly you can actually create a narrative through AI, large language models, and actually communicate it back to the patients and remove the needs from the doctors or nurses to do that kind of admin part. Still, they can have the supervision. Still, they can get involved if something doesn't make sense or if the patient really needs, the conversations with human. But 90% of the stuff can be done automatically. And when you look at, let's say, in the US, 4 trillion almost healthcare, 2 trillion of that is people's salary.
That's true, yeah.
And on top of that, there is a shortage. On top of that, everybody knows that doctors and nurses don't have enough time to actually put their attentions on what matters. So this is where I think the combination of the pipes we have created to have all this data and then being able to push back the insight as the foundations and these models on top of it, suddenly you can look after, let's say, all the CKD or asthma patients in a country with a room of, 50 doctors or 50 nurses. And keep every patient the most optimized version of themselves. Make sure that everyone gets the best supervisions. As you know, another big problem is you go from Boston to, Alabama for the same patients on the same almost drug, the outcomes are very different.
Absolutely, yeah.
And this is, one modern country like the US. Now think of, you go from Alabama to now, India. So the care is very inconsistent. And I think combination of digital health plus the large language models, it makes care super consistent, super scalable. And the good example I always like to share is no matter you're the richest kid in San Francisco or the poorest kid in India, as long as you have a mobile phone with some basic internet connectivity, your Google map takes you from A to B exactly the same way.
Same, yeah.
So this should happen for care.
Healthcare as well. Yeah, that's actually a good way of explaining it and thinking about it. So what advice would you give to healthcare professionals or researchers interested in digital innovation?
I think the most important thing is, and this is a really big problem in healthcare as a whole, it's very hierarchical and everyone is busy and everyone wants to give the persons below them
delegate to someone else.
Delegate. When you do a lot of delegations, then sometimes you will miss the people that you have delegated to the lowest part of the organizations. They don't have that big picture view. And instead of doing something with automations, with technology, people start doing a lot of manual stuff, running around, using bad software, bad technology. And of course, the people on the top, they don't see it because they're not in the decision making nor in utilization of it. But patients will suffer, or participants would suffer. The quality of data would suffer. The time that all these people are wasting because of all these, bad decisions would be wasted. I think the researchers and doctors should be a lot more hands-on in selecting the right softwares, because we are not in a world that, you have a farm and then you put 50 workers and just do farming and that's it. No, you have to be actually very strategic. You need to use technology, and the persons on the top, they need to know what's going on with the tech. And I think in next 20 years, the doctors that they adopt technology, they are the more hands-on, they understand it, they learn about it. They're the ones that they're going to move the needles.
True. I agree with you. So I want to get some final thoughts from you. And I wanted to ask you, if you had to describe Huma's mission in one sentence to a teenager, what would it be? So that a teenager would understand in very simple words.
Our mission is very simple. We want to keep every patient the most optimized version of themselves as a whole. And sometimes I don't know if you have pen somewhere here.
A pen?
Yeah.
We can find one.
Or I can borrow this. What is this?
Maybe the scissors?
Maybe this.
Yeah?
It's actually this. So the explanation is very simple. When you're healthy, you're kind of standing straight. As soon as chronic conditions or disease happens, you're tilting a little bit. And if no one's intervened, if you don't get the best care, you deteriorate, and boom, you die. What we do, very simple. When you're a little bit sick, we come here, with the data collections being proactive and predictive, we try either to push you back to your most optimized, stable, or at least slow down the progression of the disease. So that's what we do. And the way we do it is through collection of data from your body and being really on top of everything that's happening to you and making sure that you do you eat the right food, the right exercising, you're on the right treatments, and that's it. Very simple.
That is very inspiring, and it's a very simple explanation
Yes.
of Huma's mission. So, couple of quick questions. One book or podcast you like and would recommend?
The book that recently I read, by recently, like about 1 year ago, Elon Musk autobiography by Walter. It's a really interesting book because when I read it, I was like, I always thought I'm a busy guy. I work really hard. And then when I read that book, I actually felt I don't work hard enough.
I read the beginning of the book as well.
Yes, and, it's highly recommended because also it teaches you what is the true sense of urgency is. What does it mean for you to get really involved, look at everything with the first principle kind of eyes, and questions everything? Highly recommended, and I actually suggest people to read it twice or 3 times. Okay. Because you have the reading, for sake of reading, it comes from this ears, goes from the other, or really reading and absorbing. So that
I actually got 2 copies of it or 3 copies. So if anyone wants, get in touch. I can send you a copy. Great. One mistake you learned the most from, if any?
I've made so many mistakes.
I can follow up with the next one, which is very similar. What do you think most healthcare startups get wrong about working with NHS or healthcare systems in general?
This is a very tough question because every company, it's like a different animals. We have so many different animals, right? You have the insect, you have the giraffe, you have the monkey, and each animal has its own dynamic. It's really hard to give a comment that where people get things wrong. And there's so many things that people can get things wrong. For me, one of the most important thing is to keep this team small. Mm-hmm. Don't make things too big too fast, and get your products as much as possible into a place that it can generate revenue. Okay. Because without that, then you're always relying on the next investments and the next investment. I think that's one big problem that people are doing. Same, it doesn't matter whether it's NHS or health systems in the US. Going back into mistakes, I think building the team and really putting attentions on the team building, because it's very appealing to hire people fast. And you interview and then you say, what, I'm gonna hire someone, and if it's not good, I will change it. But that's a very tough process. Mm-hmm. And if I would do one thing totally differently. I would grow slower, and I would be a lot more picky on who I will bring. Okay. And the higher they are, the more picky, because a person on the top has an exponential impact into the organization.
And I don't know how you interview in your company. Is it like in stages, or just one-off interview in person, or some test?
It depends on the role and which teams they go. There is no kind of blueprint. Okay. We don't hire people based on one meeting. Okay. We do like multiple. Yeah, exchanges.
I think that's important. I think one 45-minute interview cannot tell you if someone is competent for the role, and not just for the role, but good for the team. Yeah. So that's definitely it. So my final question actually, how can people learn more about Huma, other than obviously watching this podcast?
Look, because we are not a B2C business, we partner with governments, enterprises, health systems, and pharma companies. Yeah. It's not like a product that someone says, what, I'm going to use it as a B2C consumer. It's something that your hospitals will prescribe it to you like a drug. Yeah. Or if you're going through the clinical trial, it will come as a part of the clinical trial. But our LinkedIn page, we post stuff, the latest and greatest. We don't even, update our website as much. If you go to our website is so outdated, which is not good, but we just didn't have time to fix it. And the company has moved on a lot, but the website is like from, I don't know, 3 years ago or 2 years ago. But there's some content there. Um, yeah, these are the places we talk about what we do.
And you're expanding, right? So it started off in the UK.
Yes.
And where your office is at the moment?
So we started in the UK, but now we are mostly a US company.
Okay.
We have now our headquarters in New York. We have acquired some companies in the US. We have acquired some companies in Germany. We have some operations in like Middle East. But the core three places that we have big teams, like US, UK, and Germany.
Amazing.
These are the three.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations then. I'm
No
really
worries.
proud. Thank you so much for your time and your inciting insights. I'm really impressed by you and your company's vision. And I'm very much looking forward to see, the future and even further expansion. So we are approaching the end of the episode, and you mentioned that your website is a bit outdated, but I did stalk your website, of course. And I found something on your website, and I don't know, maybe you'll say it outdated, but I really like this, and I wanted to quote this. So it says, "Sometimes we succeed, sometimes we make mistakes. Some days are fun, some days are hard. No matter the situation, we never let anything break the trust between our patients, our care providers, our partners, and each other." And I think
Yes.
that's very beautiful.
Thank
You so much,
No,
Dan.
thank you.
Thank you, guys. I hope you enjoyed this episode. See you next time. Bye.